Throughout history, there were many men and women who ruled over nations and countries. Some of these were good rulers, such as Queen Elizabeth I of England, whose legacy is still felt today. But some others, such as Queen Marie Antoinette, encountered a terrible end, and the French queen lost her head on the guillotine, the slanted-bladed execution device inside of France. But one of the most important moments when a king or queen is on their deathbed is their final words, the last words that they speak. And these are a few phrases that are meant to be something for the people to remember their monarch by. Even men and women who are sitting on death row and are executed today have their final words recorded. Some accept their fate and others do not, going to their deaths with no repentance at all. But in this video, we are going to look at some of the last words of the kings and queens who had mixed fates throughout the centuries. And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. King Henry II of England ruled over a significant English empire at a period of time in the 12th century. He was one of the strongest and most energetic monarchs, and he spent only 13 years of his reign in England, spending longer in lands such as France. He was a man who was interested in law and government, and he even tried to make his son king designate before he died, to ensure that his son would not be challenged. His final years were chaotic, but the king succumbed to his death on the 6th of July 1189 at the age of 56, which was old for a man of the medieval period. It's claimed that on his deathbed his final words were "Shame, shame on a vanquished king," meaning that his sons were about to betray him. One of the most influential kings to rule over medieval England was King Edward I. He was known as the Hammer of the Scots, or Edward Longshanks because of his tall size, but he was a warring king, and he died in the year of 1307 after ruling for some decades. And he was actually embarking in one final conquest north to capture parts of Scotland. Edward, throughout his life, dealt with his enemies terribly, and he would hang, draw and quarter men such as William Wallace Braveheart. But he had specific beliefs as to what should happen to his remains after his death. It has been claimed that Edward I's final words were, "Wrap my bones in a hammock and have them carried before the army, so that I may still lead the way to victory." With this, it is considered that the king wished for his bones to be used as a relic, to be used for future English armies to venerate and carry into battle. He thought that this could be used to galvanise the English. However, these final words are debated, as the account of his death is that he was discovered after being ill in the morning within his tent, as his servants tried to wake him. The final words of King Richard III are often overshadowed by Shakespeare and his play Richard III. Since the discovery of his remains under a car park in Leicester, the analysis of his remains showed that the king suffered a very dark and brutal death on the battlefield of Bosworth during the Wars of the Roses. Experts were able to piece together the king's final moments, and with this they concluded that Richard was probably unhorsed, falling into a bog, and that his helmet had come off, leaving him vulnerable. The alleged final words of Richard III were, "I will die a king of England. I will not budge a foot. Treason, treason." These words could have been more accurate than the first thought, as it was known that the king was fighting in the thickest presses of his enemies whilst he was cut down, and he was surrounded by those who slaughtered him. One of the most notorious kings ever to rule over any country was King Henry VIII. Henry is known for being the English monarch who had 6 wives, and he took the heads off 2 of these women inside the Tower of London. Henry VIII fell ill in 1547 and took to his bed. For a man in such bad health, he had lasted relatively well inside of Tudor England. But Henry VIII, on his deathbed in Whitehall Palace, uttered the final words, "I will first take a little sleep, and then, as I feel myself, I will advise upon the matter." The next morning, after his sleep, he had lost the power of speech and could only converse through the squeezing of hands. One of Henry VIII's last orders was for his servants to summon the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, who later attended on the king in his final moments as Henry VIII passed away, relatively peacefully. One of the greatest monarchs to rule over England was Elizabeth I, the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth had to deal with a huge number of problems throughout her reign, and she was as ruthless as her father. She had the head of her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, taken off, but her health in her final weeks began to fail. She suffered also with depression, as many of her close friends and long-serving advisers died, and Elizabeth the Queen was one of the last ones standing. She took to her bed in her final moments, and her last words were allegedly, "All my possessions for a moment of time," meaning that she would give everything up, all of her riches, to ensure she had more time. But knowing what we know about Elizabeth I's mental state, and the fact she had enough of life for the time she was taken ill, we know that these words may have been told to the people of England to give them hope that their glorious queen wanted to live, when really she had had enough. Marie Antoinette, the Queen of France, who was taken to the guillotine for her execution during the French Revolution, uttered a strange collection of final words. You would probably expect the former Austrian princess to utter something profound in front of the crowd who were there to witness her execution on the 16th of October 1793 in Paris. She was executed on the same guillotine that her husband, King Louis XVI, was, but her final words, which were recorded, were an apology, not for her behaviour or her actions, of which the French people hated, but to the executioner. As she climbed up the scaffold, she nervously trod on the foot of the executioner, and these were the Queen's last words. "Pardon me, sir, I did not mean to do it." Her final words were a short apology as she stood on the foot of the executioner who was about to take her head. Queen Victoria oversaw a huge development in the British Empire throughout her lengthy reign. She was a woman who spent a lot of time in mourning for her husband, Prince Albert, who had died decades before her, and she became incredibly depressed about this. Inside of her favourite residence, Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, Victoria took to her deathbed inside of her bedchambers, a small room, and she was surrounded by her children and her grandchildren. Her final words were allegedly recorded as either "my son, Bertie," or "Albert." In this, she may have been referring to her son Edward, who succeeded her, who was nicknamed Bertie, or she may have been referring to her deceased husband, Prince Albert, who she knew that she would now be joining in death. She also had left instructions to be buried in white with her wedding veil over her face. One of the most debatable and shocking deaths of a British monarch was the demise and suffering of King George V. George V was someone who suffered with his health for some time, and the heavy smoker suffered with his lungs. Now his final words were, according to the royal physician who was attending on George V, these words were allegedly, "God damn you." Lord Dawson, as he was known, the doctor administered fatal doses of morphine into the king, along with doses of cocaine, and this finished off King George V. It's not known if this was ran past the king whilst he was conscious, but his royal doctor finished him off to help him sleep, and he's a king who is often considered today to have been euthanized. But his final words were most likely his opposition to what was happening to him. So throughout history, the last and final words of kings and queens were very different in what they said. Some recalled back to the family member who were not there. Others issued their final orders with their last utterances. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please subscribe. And once again, thank you so much for watching.